What the fuck is this?
Why, hello.
The initial concept for my game was a multiplayer Pacman-like game where you could fight against other players using abilities unique to each character. That is what I wanted to make, but what I actually managed to make was something very short of that. After getting the FPS set up, I started by drawing Mr. Pacman himself onto the screen. All I do to achieve this is load the image into a texture object, set the texture of a sprite to that texture, then the character is drawn onto the screen. Now we have to get Mr. Nonchalant out of that corner by implementing some movement. These are the easy parts of the whole thing. I created an enum of directions, then I'd receive input. If I press a key that's supposed to take me left, the enum direction variable will be set to left. And then using the sprite's move function, I'd move the sprite to the left. Yes, it didn't work the first time. My code never works on the first try. But I just forgot to call the method.
I don't think you have any idea how fast I really am.
Oh, and I added the FPS to the window because my debug messages were drowning in the FPS print statements. We're now getting to the fun and slightly more difficult parts. We have to make him chomp. This guy is such a one-trick pony. Finding a proper animated sprite sheet was a hard task because I couldn't find one that was perfect for my needs. Or I just didn't know how to use it, I don't know. They would be misaligned or too big, etc, etc. So I decided to just draw my own art. I wasn't doing anything complicated, so it wouldn't be too hard. Then I did some research on how to make animations.
100 pixels per second. And when we set the direction, what we're going to do is...
Write that down, write that down!
What the tutorial basically said, you should draw different parts of the texture after a certain number of frames. Easy. Trying to save this young man from his dark times by adding a map. I also didn't know how to add a map, so I turned to good old Google to look for recommendations. And using vertex arrays seemed like a pretty good idea from what I was reading. In the documentation for SFML, there was an example of how to build a tile map using SFML's vertex arrays. So I spent the next 2 hours learning about that, basically. Here's a quick rundown of how it works. You create a tile map as a 2D array or a 1D array, where each number 0, 1, 2, etc. represents a tile's position in the texture sheet. There's a vertex array, which is used to map the numbers to the corresponding texture regions. I then summoned my art skills once more to draw the map texture, which was a really simple design. Moved the code into the code base. Designed the map array. And that was it. The map looked way better than I expected it to. Like, it's not great, obviously, but it's not too bad.
I mean, it's alright, like...
Okay, now we're in the thick of it. The movement right now is not good enough. Yes, he can move, but not correct. He has to move within the tile grid, not just anywhere he wants. Spoiler alert, I didn't manage to do that exactly, but I tried. I switched to using tile-based movement because that's what the OG Pacman uses. That wasn't enough to fix the misalignment issues, but to be honest, I just didn't do it correctly. So I skipped ahead and added some collision checking with the wall so he would at least stay in line. But basic AABB collisions between the player and the wall were not enough to fix the misalignment because the player would overlap with the wall in certain directions. However, I found some code on GitHub where the owner used math ceiling and floor functions to correct the coordinates of the player's corners so they would hit the wall correctly and fix the overlap. The overlap was fixed, but I still had to be pretty precise when making a turn, which was not ideal. Before making this game, I never knew this, but Pacman used something called direction buffering. This is where the game allows the player to input a turn before reaching a corner. So when you actually reach the corner, the game remembers the input and executes the turn at the earliest possible moment, as opposed to turning even if there's clearly a wall next to you. This little trick eliminated the need for alignment. I added that to my game, but I wasn't sure if it worked because my Pacman's head seemed too big to go through the horizontal spaces. I even tried switching textures because I thought That might have been the issue. After hours of failed debugging and a good 4 hours of sleep, I tried increasing the hitbox of the player in the Y-axis, and that fixed the big head problem completely. I then proceeded to add the bottom half of the map and the big hit problem was back. I removed the hitbox increment and it started working correctly again. Like, what the fuck was that about? The player can move freely at this point, but he should really look where he's going, so that's what I wanted to add next. The best method I found, for me at least, was to create a long spreadsheet of the animation in all 4 directions and then store the whole thing in an array of rectangles or interect. Then I iterate only between the area that has the animation sequence for the direction I'm facing. And done.
I don't think you have any idea how fast I really am. I'm fast as fuck, boy.
This game is supposed to be a multiplayer game, or at least a 2-player game. So I gathered the code I have and put it into an entity class so the players could share the common features. I won't go into detail of how I did this, but yeah, you can see. Dots. Adding little dots or food was not hard at all. I create a class for a singular dot with a dot texture. Then in the board class, which I later changed, I created a vector that would hold all the dots and display them on the workable tile. Obviously, they don't need to be in certain areas, but we'll get to that later. First, I need to add some collisions between the player and the dot. To add those collisions, I used AABB collision checking because this time it would be sufficient. But first, I moved the dots to the game class because that would be easier to handle the entities together. Now that the collisions are working, I had to handle what happened when they collided. Since they're being stored in a vector, the normal thing to do would be to just remove them. For a small game like mine, that wouldn't be too bad. But if your game was big, it would cause some performance issues, especially if you choose to reuse them, which would require additions too. So instead of removing them, I just set a boolean to false, and then only process and render a dot when that boolean is true. I didn't like the way the collisions with the food were looking, so instead of checking for collisions with the borders of the food and the player, I checked for collisions with their center. Now to draw the dots only in the playable area, I added that extra texture to the tile map texture. I just noticed I used 3 instead of 2, yeah, I need to change that. This is the part where we start to differentiate ourselves from the normal Pacman. I'm adding projectiles that the player can use to shoot the other player or the ghosts. I wanted to have the ghosts shoot projectiles too, but that would be too much, maybe later. Right now I'm just writing the code for a single projectile, which is almost like an entity or player, but less complicated. I then tested shooting a single projectile by pressing the spacebar. Its initial position would be set to my position and the projectile move in the direction I was facing.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
It had a bug where it would change direction every time I changed my direction. But that's because I kept updating the direction it was facing every frame. But that was a simple fix. I would just set the direction when I pressed the spacebar. Right now I'm only shooting 1 bullet and resetting its position, but I need to store more than 1. I wanted an efficient way of storing projectiles and reusing them. I had a couple of ideas on how I could do it, but then ended up going for a method similar to that of the food or dots. So I had the vector of bullet types or projectile types that I created. Then I'd initialize the vector with 12 projectiles. I'd have a counter that would increment every time I shot a projectile. When I shoot a projectile, said the word projectile so many fucking times. Anyway, if it's not already active and is not dead, meaning it wasn't shot, I'd set its initial position and the direction it was facing. Then I iterate over the bullets, updating the bullets that are active and checking for their collisions. If they collide with something, the setter is dead to true and is active to false. Then also render the bullets that are currently active.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Then for the projectiles collisions, I just used the same collisions the entities use, which worked fine. They say you can't have a threesome with 2 people, so I needed to add an extra member, which was the enemy. My god. Pacman has ghosts as the enemies. I chose to have slime things I found on Google because I thought they looked cool. Before we create the enemies, I want to be sure I can do the pathfinding part. So I started with that. After extensive research, I came across a website that taught the pathfinding step by step, kind of. So I followed along and made mine, or theirs. I don't know, I copied the code or I typed it. Doesn't matter. I won't show the footage of myself coding it, except I do. I don't know what I'm talking about. Because but it did take a long time, I can't lie. Like 4 hours, I think. For something that, okay, never mind. Just know I suffered, but we survived. Here's the finished code. Wait, maybe you don't know what pathfinding is. Do your research. But in short, it's an algorithm that to find the shortest path between where you currently are and where you want to go. Right? Yeah. Moving on, now that I have a version of the pathfinding, I can get to creating the enemies. Created the enemy class, which inherited the entity class and added some stuff to it. Then some more coding magic and we have our man of the hour. The third member.
Brother,
Then I added the pathfinding to the project with a bit of changes in what it returns and other stuff. How the enemies use the pathfinding, I would give them my current position after a few milliseconds, and their information about the shortest path to me will be updated and stored in a vector. So why the slime boy seems to be moving kind of fast and weirdly is because he is just jumping to the next position in the path and not slowly moving to it. However, to have him slowly move there, you have to know in which direction to move. To know that, I just compare the coordinates of where the enemy currently is, the coordinates of where he's supposed to move to, and that would give me the direction. That little thing I did gave me a slightly better output with speeds I can actually control.
why are you running? Why are you running?
Now instead of him just giving me hugs, I added some knockback. I'd store his previous 2 visited positions, and when he hit me, he'd go back 2 positions. Simple as that. Now that we've successfully gone from light hugging to dry humping, not a rapper, I have to make him target the other player too, because he's just being too clingy at this point. To have him target the other player, I just had to make it chase whoever it's closest to by calculating the distance between the enemy and the player, then choosing the one with the shortest distance. I wanted to add a feature I was most excited about: missiles. I thought it would be easy since I already had the pathfinding working. All I had to do was spawn a missile when I pressed a button and it would track down enemies, then either explode or destroy them. But things didn't go as planned. It had a couple glitches I just couldn't fix. Sometimes it worked perfectly, other times it didn't work at all. After spending hours debugging, I finally decided to drop it completely, which was pretty frustrating, but maybe things are better in a different universe. That was the last thing I tried to add. I wanted to add more abilities, but after how long that took and just failing, I didn't want to try again. So decided to refine the game. I added more enemies. The players took damage when they got shot or hit by the enemies, and had the enemies take damage when shot. Added some UI elements so you could see what's going on. I didn't make the enemies drop anything right now because I needed a break from this project and I wasn't ready for all that. So I just made the reload button you'd press to reload your bullets, and here's the game. Okay, this game didn't come out how I was expecting it to, but you live, you learn. I will say though, it has potential. If I add more features, polish it up, and actually play with a second player, because I'm playing alone right now, I think it could be fun. What do you guys think? If you've gotten this far and you haven't liked or subscribed, then you're just a creep. Like, come on. Anyways, see you in the next video.
Bye!